Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. Today we have a very special guest, Professor Efraim Inbar, who is the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, a think tank in Israel. Professor Inbar was the founding director of the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies for 23 years, and also a professor of political studies at Bar-Ilan University. He's the author of 5 books. He holds his MA and PhD from the University of Chicago, so he knows Chicago very well, having lived once upon a time on Washington, not far from the previous Ida Crown building, and actually having taught Limudei Kodesh, Judaic studies at Ida Crown when he was also doing his graduate work. It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Efraim Inbar. Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
What I really want to get started with the big issues that are out there, the Iran deal, the Saudi Arabia, what's happening with Abraham Accords. Maybe let's just start with a simple question. What's happening with the Abraham Accords? How is it changing the dynamic with Israel and its neighbors?
Well, the Abraham Accords is a clear sign that part of the Arab world, a growing part, is coming to terms with the existence of the State of Israel. And it is also showing that the Palestinians have no veto power over this process of gradual recognition, acceptance of a Jewish state in the Middle East. Furthermore, it is obviously signaling to Iran that Israel has a de facto alliance with Arab states in the Gulf, very close to Iran, and it is an important actor in the Middle East.
And so this has changed those two aspects regarding the Palestinians and regarding the Iranians. Regarding what made it happen? Obviously the American administration would like to take all of the credit, or the previous administration. Would this have happened with the Abraham Accords happened on their own without American intervention?
Of course, what I will try to offer is only a speculation. We cannot really know what would have happened, in different circumstances. I think the American input was very important. And we had a president that was seen at least as very pro-Israeli. He was very much interested in trying to prove to the whole world that the peace process can proceed and progress in a different way than his predecessor, Obama, thought it should be. And there was, of course, facts on the ground which helped him do it. The Israeli Gulf relations were mostly under the table. Israeli businessmen were in the Gulf. There were exchanges of intelligence. There were contacts between leadership. So the basis for a change of the Arab countries coming out of the closet, as we say, the potential was there. And the Americans simply put additional pressure on them and convinced them that the time is ripe for them to have a peace treaty with Israel. What also contributed was the fact that the Americans decided to go out of the Middle East. And it's a decision made by the Obama administration, by the Trump administration. And the Arabs realized that the Americans are going. And the only real actor in the Middle East that can stop Iranian encroachment, that can stop Iranian nuclear program, was Israel. And the accords are built upon the assumption that Israel will do something in order to diminish the threatening role of Iran in the region.
So given the latest news about how quickly people are proposing that Iran can break out with nuclear material for a bomb, can Israel really stop what's happening?
Well, it obviously transpired that everybody understands it that in recent years, because of the many elections we are choosing people, this military option was neglected. And unfortunately, Netanyahu was busy trying elections, didn't allocate enough money, and didn't put enough stress on maintaining the military option against the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. And nowadays, we need more time in order to prepare to be more effective in this area. And indeed, this current government allocated the money, and the military is training, is preparing. And I think we should expect Israel to be ready within a year or two to make good on its threats. In the meantime, I think it's an imperative upon Israel to do something against Iran in order to save the Abraham Accords. And my institute suggested to the government to preemptive strikes against the proxies of Iran in order to demonstrate to our new Arab partners that we are serious about the Iranian threat, and they can rely on us that we'll do something about this issue. Otherwise, actually, they don't have an acute interest in having relations with Israel. Those Gulf countries have enough money, they can get all the technology they want from all over the world, and they can live without having open, good relations with Israel.
So the relationship that we have with the Abraham Accords are more Sinat Haman versus Ahavat Mordechai. It's not because they love us, but because they are afraid or hate the Iranians more?
Fear is the best political currency in the Middle East. And we have to understand it. Americans don't realize what international politics are all about. Some of them are liberal, some of them are naive, which is not exactly the same. And but yeah, definitely fear is an important factor in international relations. And this was made quite clear from the time of Thucydides, who documented the Peloponnesian War, in 5th century BC.
So today, is the government doing what they need to do to maintain the Abraham Accords, to create the necessary fear, to create the alliances for good?
First of all, as I mentioned, they allocated money to the military, a few billions of shekels. We've seen the Israeli IDF training, the Israeli military training, its Air Force. Just last month, we had a huge exercise, including a division that trained in Cyprus on a Lebanese scenario. So definitely Israel is doing something. Apart from that, the continuous shadow war between Iran and Israel has intensified in recent weeks. We've seen Iranian scientists having, a bad meal and dying afterwards, and some mishaps happen to a series of people. So I think Israel is showing its partners that we are doing something. Will it be enough? It remains to be seen.
And moving over to one of your other areas of expertise, Turkey, the warming up of relations, is it based on the same thing, that Turkey needs Israel because of Iran, or What's happening there?
No, I don't think that Turkey is fearful of Iran. Turkey is a big country, over 80 million people. It had for years a very cautious relationship with Iran. They, for a few centuries, they didn't go to war against each other. We're talking about two big empires, the Persian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. And nowadays, they changed their policy toward Israel because of economic hardship. The Turkish economy is in dire circumstances. And also it is politically isolated in the region. And they were successful in estranging many countries in the Middle East. They have, of course, a historic rivalry also with Egypt. They don't like the fact that Israel has built a de facto alliance with Greece and Cyprus. So they feel uncomfortable under those circumstances. And probably another important reason for the change of attitude is that the relations with the Biden administration are worse than the relations with the previous administration, with the Trump administration. And like good anti-Semites, they believe that the Jews control Washington. And so they come to us in order to alleviate their situation in Washington.
And so,
but they need our gas. Economically, they need our gas. But probably they're not going to get it.
and so in that sense, it's good news for the Jews that what's happening now in with Turkey?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Turkey, and by the way, Turkey has maintained excellent economic relationship with Israel. During the civil war in Syria, when they couldn't export by land their goods to the Arab world, they still use the Haifa port to transfer the export via Haifa to Jordan and from there to the rest of the Arab world. Moreover, I'm not sure that your listeners are aware, there are about 20 flights every day from Ben Gurion Airport to the Istanbul airport, and the economic relations are blooming. There is a certain pragmatic streak in Erdogan, who is an Islamist, is an ideologue, but business is business.
And that drives it. Now, there was an announcement I read yesterday, I believe, that Lapid suggested that no matter what happens with the current government, the current coalition, that the president of the United States is still planning on coming to Israel, that it's not dependent on a government. What would you expect when the president comes to Israel? Will it strengthen Israel? Is he going to reach out to the Palestinians and strengthen the Palestinians in a way that they may not deserve? What would you expect from that?
You see, we have a problem with this administration. It's basically a replica of the Obama administration, which was seen by everybody, particularly in the Middle East, but not only in the Middle East, as weak. We want a strong America. We don't want a weak America. Obviously, going into the footsteps of the Obama administration, their perceptions of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very problematic from our point of view. And we have a big difference on Iran. This government decided to keep quiet our differences, despite emphasizing that Israel will continue to have freedom of action, and we are not pleased with what is happening. But it seems to me that the Biden administration is very desperate to get a deal with the Iranians. They want to move it from the agenda. They kick as Americans say,
Kick the can down.
Kick cans along the road. And now they have even a bigger problem because of the war in Ukraine. They have a Russian opponent, which is active militarily, and they have an energy crisis. So Iran becomes less important in terms of the American priorities, but it becomes important because it has oil, and they want the Iranian oil to be on the energy market. It will influence somewhat maybe the economic situation in the United States, will lower down the inflation. After all, Biden is looking at the elections in November. And so we have big differences between us and the Americans. I don't think they'll be solved by Biden coming to Jerusalem. He also, of course, comes to Jerusalem and wants also to Riyadh, to Saudi Arabia, to try to bring in more Saudi oil into the energy market. But we don't have great expectations from this government, although the relations between the military defense establishment, our defense establishment, and the American establishment are very good. And hopefully the Americans will continue to some extent to have a strategic perspective on what's happening in the Middle East. Although Biden, and this shows his strategic short-sightedness, canceled the support for the Israeli East Med pipeline that was supposed to bring gas to Europe. He canceled the American support just a few weeks before the war in Ukraine that precipitated an energy crisis.
The war in Ukraine, does it present a strategic threat to Israel?
No, it's far away.
Far away.
Wars far away are okay with us. Not only that, I see, a few benefits for Israel. First of all, the Europeans wake up. It's a waking up call for them. They believe that they are living in a strategic paradise, and which is, of course, it's not true. Suddenly they see maybe the Russians are getting close to them. If they develop higher threat perception, and they do, maybe there'll be more understanding of the Israeli national security dilemmas. Also, they allocated a lot of money to defense. Part of it will go to the Israeli military industries. We see also immigration from Ukraine and even from Russia, which strengthens the state of Israel. And we also show that we are independent. The Russians appreciate that we do not side fully with Americans on the war, on the issue of the war. We do not supply weapons to Ukraine. We are careful because the Russians are next door, our next door neighbors in Syria. And we have to be careful when such a big bear is next to us. And he is sometimes, sensitive or nervous. We have to be careful.
And from that perspective, when we look at Israeli politics and how it impacts on the strategic side, last week there was a vote in Knesset which would have provided additional support for the law in Yudan and Shomron and Judea and Samaria. And for the first time, the opposition voted against it. It was normally something that would pass every year and be renewed all the time. Are we coming to a case in Israel where the opposition politics, the coalition and the opposition is going to be so divided that even on strategic matters, they're going to undermine the state? Or are we safe that on the key strategic matters, everyone still gets it?
The Jewish people have a history of extremism. We lost twice a state in the past because we were not wise enough politically. So I definitely cannot give you a guarantee, that will be okay on this issue. Eventually, probably, I'm not sure, but there is a possibility that this government will fall. Then we may have new elections or another coalition, and probably a right-wing coalition. Jews are unpredictable when it comes to domestic politics. I mean, not venture to prophesize what will happen.
But will the have domestic politics impacted the international politics, or is domestic politics, has the state been able to keep things compartmentalized? We'll fight in Israel, but when it comes to our overall security, we will be together.
I think that, domestic politics affect international relations. The fact that we had so many elections and it seems that Israel is not a stable country definitely weakened us. We projected an image of a country that is not able to put its house in order. And what is happening now adds to this image. We make mistakes, which are not always easily corrected. There is always a linkage between domestic politics and foreign policy. Also, this type of divisions invite foreign intervention. I'm sure the Biden administration is working hard to prop this government in order to prevent a Netanyahu-led government. Despite the fact that Netanyahu says that he knows Biden for years and he's a great friend of Israel, I think Biden prefers Bennett to Netanyahu.
What is, in your mind, the greatest strategic threat to the state of Israel? Is it Iran? Is it something else? Is it a combination of factors?
The greatest threat is obviously Iran. Particularly their quest for a nuclear bomb. A nuclear bomb is something that, Iranian nuclear bomb is something I don't think we can live with. Therefore, we will try to do our best to prevent it. We have to realize that the differential of power between us and the Arab states is clearly in our favor. Our diplomatic position is stronger than ever. And the only problem is that we have a strong country like Iran, an important country like Iran, that is dedicated to the destruction of the state of Israel for religious grounds, but also for strategic grounds, because they understand that, particularly after the Americans leave the Middle East, it is only Israel that can stop their attempt to attain hegemony in this area.
And the idea of mutual deterrence, what used to keep the United States and the Soviet Union at bay on nuclear matters, is that something that can work in the modern world?
It worked maybe for America in the Soviet Union. I don't think it can work in the Middle East because of a variety of reasons. Distance, also the decision-making processes of the countries here. And I would like to point out that deterrence is basically dependent upon sensitivity to cost. We believe that the Russians and the Americans have a certain sensitivity to cost, which will prevent them from initiating a nuclear war. The Iranians have said quite clearly that they are willing to sacrifice millions in order to destroy the Jewish state. So their sensitivity to cost is rather low. Therefore, I don't believe that what the American calls MAD or mutual deterrence can work in our region. There was never such levels of hostility between America and the Soviet Union as there are between Iran and Israel. In the Soviet Union, at soccer matches, they didn't shout death to America. In Iran, they do. They do. Death to Israel, death to America.
And the realm of, we're coming close to the end of our time, and we've been talking about destruction and dangers and all of the other fears that are out there. Are there things that that we should be encouraged about strategically between Israel and the rest of the world? Are there things we should be celebrating?
Yeah, I think Israel is a strong state, a flourishing state. Israel has a strong society. You know, in every democratic country, people have the right to exit, to leave the country. And there are countries that are looking for immigrants, you know, Australia, Canada. And in recent years, we have not seen many Israelis leaving the country to go to Australia, to go to other places, particularly the high-tech sector, which can take its discount key and go anywhere in the world. They'll be welcome. No, they stay in Israel. Israeli mothers send their kids to the army, knowing well that there are risks involved. And the Israeli society displays great resilience despite the long, protracted conflict. We are in conflict already for 100 years. And Israel continues to display high spirit and willingness to bear the costs of having an independent state.
Have we recovered from the Yom Kippur War disappointments? Has the Israeli military regained its position of pride and self-assurance?
I think that there is greater willingness to criticize the army. We are becoming obviously more democratic. They are not holy cows anymore. But 1973 is a long time ago.
And
we live in a different era now.
And the rise of Dati officers in the military, has that had a major impact? We hear all the time that there are more people who are Bogrei, whether it's Hesder or Mechinot, who are rising in the ranks.
Yeah, I think that we see as the junior commanders, junior officers, a huge proportion of national religious officers, but they don't stay. They want to raise a family. Their wives want them at home. So, and family values are very important. No, I know Gantz, the current chief of defense minister. When he was chief of staff, he said at the conference when I was at the business center, I don't look under the beret what they have, and actually I welcome national religious officers because they have great motivation and they are good. So now the military is ready to accept them, and part of the left, thinks that they are dangerous to the country. That's nonsense.
Professor Inbar, believe it or not, our time is up, and I want to thank you again. I know how precious your time is and how wise your counsel is as well. So I thank you so very much for joining us. I do remember your time at teaching at Ida Crown, and hopefully we'll see you back in Chicago at one of the many conferences you speak at. And I thank you, and I wish you to have a very good evening and continue to lead us with strength.
Thank you very much.
So,
all the best
to
the Jewish community in Chicago.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.